conclude the day and wrap up the Africa Proptech Forum, we have Ann-Maree Tippoo, Portfolio Manager at 91, to discuss ESG, net zero, and PropTech. Where does PropTech overlap with ESG goals? And how will tech drive the real estate's journey to net zero? To join her on this panel, we have Nicola White, Business Development and Marketing Director at EBS Advisory. Virtually, we will have Sheila Moraa, Head of ESG at Acorn Investment Management Limited, Dennis Quansah, Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria Lead for Green Building Market Transformation Program at IFC Edge, Brian Annechino, Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Echostone, and Lisa Shaw, Head of Utility Management at CBRE Excellerate. Please help me applaud them and welcome them to the stage. Thank you so much. I now hand over to Ann-Maree. I would just like to let our moderator know that from 20 minutes before you wrap up, I will be counting you down. I have a screen right there, and the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I can't lie and say I'm surprised to see your faces here. 5 p.m., we really got the graveyard shift. I don't think there's a shift that could have been better described than that. But thank you for joining us. I think it's a very exciting topic, actually, and almost quite crucial, almost in my mind, the nexus, really where PropTech can come alive and really make a difference in terms of the unfolding and the future of property and real estate in Africa and obviously globally, and some really important topics we're discussing today. I nearly said this morning, but that's because I was on a flight at 6 a.m. this morning. The topic today, where does PropTech overlap with ESG goals, environmental, social, and corporate governance goals, and how will this tech drive the real estate's journey to net zero? So I have a very established panel of five faces here this afternoon to chat us through this. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves. I think they can do better justice to that than I can. So maybe I can kick off right away. I think it's on already. Just give it a tap, yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Annechino, the VP for Global Business Development at Echostone. Echostone is a construction technology company that provides a construction system for building affordable housing. We currently work in Latin America and in Africa. Our experience is in Nigeria and Ghana currently.
Hi, my name is Dennis Quansah. I work for the IFC. I'm the Green Building Lead, and I focus mainly on Ghana, Nigeria, and then Kenya. Right.
Hi, my name is Nicola White. I work for EBS Advisory. We are an ESG consultant that works throughout Africa and developing Asia. So we generally service the private equity and financial industries on ESG.
Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Shaw. I head up the Utilities, Energy and Sustainability team at CBRE Excellerate. So our clients are typically REITs, property portfolios, and of course on the occupier side.
And we've got Sheila online. So Sheila, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Ann-Maree. Hello everyone, my name is Sheila Moraa. I work with Acorn Investment Management Limited, and I handle the ESG function within the organization. To just give a bit of a background, Acorn is actually a real estate development company with 3 core capabilities. So we look at development management, property management, and investment management. And our focus currently is in Kenya in the rental sector. We currently provide purpose-built student accommodation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for introducing yourselves and giving us a bit of context and background to what it is you do and the interface with ESG and sustainability. Nicola, I'm going to start with you, which feels a bit unfair because Nicola got thrown onto this panel this afternoon as a substitute. Unfortunately, her colleague is ill, so I feel a bit unfair asking you first. But I think given that you are in the advisory space, this might be most appropriate to start off with you. EBS has been in this advisory space for many, many years. And I'm interested to understand, what have you seen, what has your organization seen in the role of tech and prop tech retrospectively in this kind of ESG journey? And then more excitingly, what is the next step? You know, what do we have to get excited about in the room here? Yeah, tell us a little bit about the history.
That's an enormous question.
It is. Luckily, we have a bit of time.
Yeah, great. I think we all know that putting policies, procedures, management systems in place is not really going to cut it. Unless you have the data and verifiable data, you can easily slip into the problem of greenwashing. We've all seen how Deutsche Bank, Unilever, everybody else has been called out seriously for greenwashing. Now, the problem with data, a management system can sort of guide you in the right direction, but unless you have the tools to properly clean, measure, and benchmark your data is not worth anything. And this is where PropTech comes in. We all know there are various tools you can use in order to measure your heat and your humidity and watch out for mold and look at your HVAC systems and look at your energy efficiency, carbon emissions. But the new tech that is coming on has to be able to also measure issues with regards to the circular economy and biodiversity. And most importantly, if you're going to use ESG to move beyond a risk management tool and get it into the to essentially allowing you to access new markets, new revenue streams, new finance that's cheaper than original finance at least 30 basis points reduction, you need to supplement the data with proper stakeholder engagement. So we'll hear a lot about probably apps that you can use to talk to your tenants or your renters or whoever it is. But you need to also be going into your communities. You know, for every one job you give on a construction site, on average, there are 3.5 other jobs created. Are you going into your communities and measuring the actual impact on those communities in terms of things like average household debt, education levels, where the children are and what's happening? So looking at ESG and going beyond that to the actual real impact, using well-used international multipliers to calculate the impact and improve it. Then you've got some real hardcore data which allows you to prove yourself within the space, and clearly PropTech is going to give you that data. I did want to mention one other thing. If you look at the regulatory standards around the world, we've seen this all progressing. You've seen the TCFD, the Johannesburg Sustainability Standards are very much based on TCFD. But the horror that is down the road for most of us is SFDR, and it's going to come into the South African market. Those are the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulations that are based themselves on the European taxonomy. And essentially, if you want funds from investors, from LPs, from whomever, you're going to have to try and get yourselves up from an Article 6 to an Article 8 and 9 fund. And then you're going to have to demonstrate that you do no significant harm to any environmental or social criteria. If you do harm, you can't qualify as an Article 9 fund. And on top of that, you also have to comply with the OECD's guidelines for multinational corporations. That requires you to do an entire life cycle assessment. That means your supply chain, baby. How on earth are you going to calculate your supply chain's GHG footprint, carbon footprint, and particularly in countries in more developing circumstances? So it's a hotbed of quicksand, really, changing all the time. And the only way you can do it, I think, is using clever technology. And often in Africa, we're going to need to develop technology that's based on cell phones. It's based on apps, so that we can go into our communities and gather the data easily. We can also allow our tenants and our business people to populate the technology without any automation on their side if need be. And that's really my take on it.
Thank you. I mean, I was going to follow what you've said, or the question of, or the statement of, a lot of ESG PropTech or sustainability PropTech is focused on simply risk and or measurement. Let me call it monitoring and measurement. And surely we need to move past that. But you've kind of raised the point of actually there's a whole nother level of measurement and monitoring that needs to come into play. And we haven't seen anything yet. And so I think we as you say, PropTech has got quite a pivotal role to play in this next leg and the next phase of measurement and monitoring. And it's almost not the individual companies, as it were, and the individual corporates, but supply chains, looking further than yourself and understanding the full cycle. I mean, the next question I have, and I actually want to leave it on the table and circle back to it at the end, is kind of related to that, is what is the next step for ESG and PropTech? You know, we've had this measurement and monitoring phase, which we're all trying to still get our heads around, and how do we use the data? It's one thing having the data, but how do we use it? What is the next step? What is the next aha moment and really catalyzing the space and moving us all forward? So I'm going to leave that question to hang in the air for a little bit, and we can come back to that. Perhaps I can move to those kind of on the ground, Brian and Sheila. Sheila, let me start with you. Sorry, I'm pointing to the screen. I can see. I don't know where you can see us. So, and maybe you can start with, as a company, what are the SDG goals you're focusing on at the moment? And then we can kind of wrap that up or move along with how does that kind of tie in with how PropTech helps you focus on those SDG goals?
I think you can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
Just like Nicola said, big question. But as a company, we are focusing on, currently we have 8 SDG goals that we are focusing on, broadly spread across environmental concerns, social concerns, and governance concerns. And on the environmental, we are focusing on SDG 11, which is on sustainable cities and communities, because we are in the development space. So we develop the properties that we actually eventually manage for our students and for our residents. And I think what I would say in terms of where PropTech then comes into that is the realization that we have to come to the place where we're able to collect data and make it work for us in terms of designing sustainable buildings. And for us, what we've been able to adopt are, we have a very integrative tool called App, which we use called Propo, which we use for our designs. And what this helps us is that it's got a communication tool that is able to raise various issues and helps with reporting during the construction phase. The other thing that we're also focusing on is SDG 12, which is on responsible consumption and production. And this is for us to be clear, you know, in terms of reaching our green building designs to use materials that have less embodied energy. And for this, we're actually working with the IFC Edge platform in selecting materials that meet these requirements. And we consistently then improve on this by linking that also with Propo, the design app. Because, for example, once we identify what embodied energy, what carbon footprint, you know, the materials are carrying, we're able to work out what then, you know, is in line with what our aspirations are towards achieving, you know, more sustainable buildings. Then the other SDG that we focus on, being that we are providing purpose-built student accommodation, is actually education, quality education. And for this, we are partnering with universities to just get to know what the needs are for the residents and be able to provide accommodation that's affordable, decent, but also safe and secure for them. And in line with, again, the sustainability agenda, is to be able to incorporate the designs, you know, from an engineering perspective and also from an architectural perspective, from an area of looking at, you know, the thermal comfort and all that. So we put that all in to ensure that as we partner with the residents and we partner with the universities in ensuring that we support the core function of providing quality education. And coupled with this, we also focus on SDG 3, which is on good health and well-being. And for us, it's to ensure that our residents, you know, have a wonderful experience, you know, within our properties. So it's the things that we've been able to put into the properties to ensure that this is actually achieved, you know, in terms of the air quality, the light quality, and the thermal comfort within the buildings. The other thing we look at is from a development perspective, is also just the HSCC angle, which I think has been talked about earlier on during the day. So we are able to ensure that indeed every construction worker who comes to any of our sites, is able to be connected back at the end of the day with their family. So providing safe facilities, providing and ensuring that indeed there's facilities in place to ensure that they are comfortable within the construction site, that they're able to do their work well within our construction properties. And this also then couples up with SDG 5, which is on gender equality. And for both the development side and the management side of our business is to ensure that we're providing equal opportunities, to both the female and the male workers who come to work, and also within our stakeholder space. And to be able to do this, we use various apps that, some which have been developed internally to just help us track data on these elements to ensure that indeed we're not just talking about having a social angle, but not being able to provide data to support.
Sheila, maybe I can stop you there and ask you a question. As you've mentioned, you use sometimes you use apps that are developed internally. Perhaps, one of the key things is what further assistance from the PropTech space, or what further products or offerings do you think would really provide good input and good assistance for companies such as yourself, or just yourselves, because you're developing internally, but that's not necessarily your core competence as a company. And what are those types of products or PropTech offerings you'd like to see that you think could really make a difference?
I think if I can just circle back a bit on that question. So first of all, in the African space, the uptake or the adoption, of PropTech is still a bit slow, because policy at the moment does not require us to have to really, back up what we're doing with data. And as Nicola talked earlier about greenwashing, there's really no watchdog, so to speak, watching over that. So I think for me, the first step really is to have this requirement, coming in. So I think that we need to have a lot of fast stakeholder engagement for the tech companies to be able to appreciate what really is required for our spaces. I liked what Nicola said about using of mobile apps, and I think that's where we can really get a lot of help from the tech companies, because everyone has access to to a mobile phone. And in Kenya, M-Pesa literally transformed the fintech space. So I think for us, it's develop apps that are simple to use, but also available, at the click on the go on a mobile app. The other thing I think that would help, especially development companies, is to have apps that are specific, to construction requirements. For example, what I would be looking at my sites would be near misses in a day. If I look at HCC, for example, I'd be looking at near misses, I'd be looking at actual incidences, and then be able to put this in an app in a way that can help us, proactively think about how to avoid such. So I think most of the apps, which is what led us to develop some of these internally, are very generic and not specifically suited to real estate, I would say, from both a construction perspective and also from a management perspective. So I think the need right now in the industry really is to understand what the requirements are by deeper stakeholder engagements, and then be able to develop apps that will be suited to that, but available as well on mobile phones.
Okay, thank you. Maybe it would be interesting to bring you in, Ann-Maree, because you operate in similar spaces and in similar types of markets. What are the types of product offerings you'd like to see in the PropTech space? And do you have similar feelings to Sheila in terms of things need to be a bit more specific to what you are doing? And are you finding that you actually need to develop things in-house in order to meet that need?
Yeah, it's actually today has been, although it felt like it started out simple, and I was in the early sessions saying, wow, it's all about impact. And that's easy to understand. And after attending a number of the sessions today, I just feel overwhelmed by the whole space of property tech and ESG and sustainability. But Echostone as a company actually started by bringing construction technology in-house to start. In 2015, the company was created out of a family office in the United States. It was a family office that was entering a phase of their lives where they wanted to have a legacy and an impact globally, and they selected affordable housing. At the time, I actually worked all over Africa in global health. I was in disease surveillance working with ministries of health for a number of years. And what drew my attention was in 2015 when they decided to enter affordable housing in Africa. It was right at the moment when the Sustainable Development Goals were created in 2015. And I kind of converted myself from SDG 3, global health, which was fairly easy to measure, to SDG 11. And UN Habitat actually in Kenya educated me a while ago that everything starts with the home, with a place to live. You can't get education, you can't get health, you can't get a number of things there. So when we started, we were fortunate to have the financial backing to be a developer. We were the investor, we invested in our own projects, and we created our own construction technology through years of R&D. We created an innovative machine that produces a special form of concrete. That's an insulated concrete that you can produce on site, on the job, on demand. It's a machine that's actually near and dear to my heart from my disease surveillance days, but it's computer driven. It actually will track every ounce, every millimeter of material, cement, sand that goes through it. So you can actually learn from the data of the operations on site, on the fly. And then we took another piece of, I guess, property technology, which was a lightweight recyclable formwork system. And we kind of created them together, and we started to just use them on our own projects. And then COVID hit. And actually, we met Dennis a few years ago because we built, I think it was the first EDGE certified housing community in Nigeria. And we also built the first EDGE certified housing community in Panama. And COVID hit, and we realized that we were really good at technology. We weren't a very good developer. As a US company, we weren't good at selling homes in Nigeria. And it wasn't just the market. So we recognized that for us to scale and to reach the larger impact of what the SDGs, ESG, sustainability benefits, we needed to reach more people. And we weren't going to be able to do it ourselves. So we changed our business model a couple years ago. We now license the technology and provide all of the training so that we can get our technology into the hands of developers in Africa that are probably a better developer than we ever were. And so that's kind of what we've been doing as a company.
So maybe then, this is the appropriate question to ask you now, is what is the next piece of interesting technology that you think developers in Africa and other emerging markets in that sustainable housing or affordable housing space are looking for? What is the need there?
That's an impossible question. I wish I knew. In fact, we even created last year back in the US, a sustainable building technology center, because we recognized that while we were creating a piece of technology that in a couple of years it's probably going to be obsolete or it's not going to be the solution of the future. So we're actually doing R&D in parallel to what we're using today. But what I would say is that we're in a conservative industry with conservative regulations and even more conservative building codes, and it's all about adoption. So whatever the technology is, focus on adoption. That is, I think it was a question that you had asked, is what's the next step? It's adoption. It's adoption to get to scale and to not have the fear. I know there's a lot of risk and layers of oversight with all of the ESG reporting, but just to get started.
So since you've kind of changed your business model and licensed out these technologies, what has your experience with adoption been? And have different markets responded differently? And what do you hope for that adoption of those two specific technologies that you mentioned?
You know, we trialed it in Nigeria 3 or 4 years ago. We actually took our technology into Nigeria and we built a model house with a vocational school, an engineering school, and we donated the house to them. And we actually used the students as the laborers. And we said, if the future generation of the labor force can't use this technology, it's never going to work. And we were shocked at how well they adopted at least this particular system. So we understood it can be done. And that's kind of where our focus has been, is building an environment around our company and our technology that is all focused on technology transfer and capacity building and training so that we can get the wider benefits of the labor force. You said 3.5 jobs are created, so we need to build more houses because there's a multiplier effect.
Yes.
So that's kind of where our focus has been.
I mean, this might be a bit of an unfair question because you changed that business model just before COVID, right? Did I get the timing right there?
Good timing.
Okay. And so you focus on capacity building, you're focusing on technology transfer, but what is this rate of adoption? And so, you know, you've seen a positive response in some of those pilot projects, et cetera, but are you seeing developers really using your technology? How do we get companies and developers to actually onboard?
You know, it's not the technology. The technology itself, from what we've seen, is not the barrier here. I think that there's not enough developers that have at least the incentives. So for instance, we also build in Panama. There are clear incentives that are offered to the buyers, to the developers, a more mature investment community around those projects. There are clear incentives that are motivating many, many developers over the last 10 years. All they do is affordable housing. Actually, a lot of the developers that we're starting to work with aren't in affordable housing. They're in the luxury or mid space that is becoming more saturated, and they want to get into affordable housing, but they want to start small, they want to trial it, and they're trying to understand how is it to be done, because it's a completely different market segment that most developers aren't very comfortable with. So when you have a space where margins are thin, it just creates an environment where there's risk, and there should be, I think, a better enabling environment for the wider value chain, which I think has some more growth potential, I would say.
Fair enough. Both you and Sheila referenced IFC Edge certification and the program there. Maybe, Dennis, you can clue us in a little bit about what it is that program is and what the certification is and the progress you're making and the strides you're making in that regard.
Okay, so the IFC Edge program has one main objective, is to encourage developers to build green. And by encouraging them to go green, we also look at the impediments that they have to overcome for them to go green. Because developers are not, they are not just saying they won't go green because they don't want to go green. There are some real issues, right? So you speak to a developer, he doesn't even know how to go green. What qualifies as going green? Is it just painting my house green or planting trees? What exactly is green? What are you talking about? Right, so Edge tries to provide a solution by coming up with a software which now is able to guide the developer. That if you want to go green, this is what you can do. You can click on these measures, and then you can see exactly how it impacts your projects. Right, so that education helps. And then the second part is on incremental costs. The whole idea is that going green is very expensive. And I said this in a panel earlier this afternoon. You would ask a developer who tells you this, that, okay, so exactly how expensive is going green going to be for you? He has no idea. He just assumes that, well, the pictures of green buildings he's seen around means he cannot afford to build them, right? And that's the other problem, because the images of what a green building is supposed to be that we see around are usually the very sophisticated projects, right? If we show you some of the projects that have been certified by Edge in countries like Haiti and even Ghana, that you may say, how were they green? Right, so then the software helps these developers to understand exactly what it is, how much it's going to cost them to be able to go green, right? So that helps in the solution. And then also, in terms of funding, the Edge platform provides you the opportunity to connect to investors, which is very key to these developers. We would not want you to just go green because it's good for the environment. You should also make profit out of it, right? You should also be able to make your business run, right? So that's also another option over there, right? So we try to look at all of this, and then we try to create the enabling environment by connecting the cities, the financial institutions to these developers. Can they also come up with incentives like green products? Can a city come up with incentives, very simple incentive like, say, discounted permit fees, tax incentives, expedited permitting? And you'll be surprised because sometimes in some countries, it takes a very long time to get permits. And that time that the developer is waiting for the permits is very, very precious to him. Now, if there is an incentive that if your project is going to be green, a certified green, you are not going to go through the queue, right? You can jump the queue. It makes a lot of impact. The city authority is not going to spend so much money to implement this incentive. And they are going to get that benefit, right? So we work with these cities to discuss some of these very simple, basic things that they can do, which they may not have thought about it before. But then they listen to us and they see that, okay, there's a lot of benefit in there. So that's what the EDGE program does. Now, over the last few years, because in Africa, we started work in South Africa in 2017. Ghana was in 2018. We moved to Nigeria sometime around 2018 as well, and then Kenya. These are our priority countries across Africa. South Africa is doing very well. At the moment, I think about 30% of all new build in South Africa is certified green. Out of this, about 30%, after 40% of that is with EDGE. Yes, a greater portion is with Green Star. It's very understandable. Green Star started very early, right? But if you move to countries like Ghana, Nigeria, and then Kenya, the number of projects that have been certified green is far low. In our assessment that we did sometime last year, actually 2 years ago, we realized that only 1% of new build that's coming up in both Nigeria and Ghana is built green, right? And out of...
Sorry, repeat that, Dennis?
Only 1%.
1%,
yes.
Did everybody catch that?
Yes, just 1% of new builds, as in new buildings that are coming up every year, is certified green, right? And surprisingly, for Ghana, out of that 1%, all of them, about 95% of it, was using EDGE. Right, so it meant that the market was now responding in a different way. They are seeing the benefits and gradually are coming. We do not expect to get to the 20%. So our target was to do 20% for all the projects for the priority countries, to make sure that by the time we exited these countries, it would get to 20%. We have succeeded in doing that in Colombia. Colombia, we started the program there in 2018. 4 years down the line, 2022, when we did our assessment, more than 22% of new buildings coming up in Colombia are certified green. And out of this, 60% of it is affordable housing.
Okay.
Right, so, and that's the other angle that we always wanted to go to, that green wasn't for sophisticated building and expensive building and all that. Affordable housing can also be green.
So that's interesting, because what I'm hearing actually is that there needs to be a little bit of a change of the rhetoric and understanding of what it means to be green and what types of assets can be green, what type of landlords can actually strive to have portfolios which are kind of striving towards being fully green, and it's not just these big glass offices we see down Santon Drive, etc. And affordable housing is probably at the coalface of it, actually. Yeah. Because one of the things I was going to say is when I was reading up a little bit more about this EDGE certification and looking at your goal of 20%, I thought, that doesn't seem very ambitious when you have the net zero targets of 45% reduction in carbon by 2030 and net zero by 2050, but given what your experience has been, it does sound very ambitious.
Well, actually, for EDGE, net zero is not 20%. The 20% is for just being EDGE certified. So what happens is EDGE gives the opportunity for our clients to grow, right, we know that it's very difficult for you to, right from the start, hit net zero status. It should be a progress, right? You should go through a particular process to reach net zero. So EDGE provides the opportunity. So we have the EDGE certified, there's EDGE advanced, and then we have the EDGE net zero. EDGE net zero, we expect you to hit 100% savings on energy, right? So first of all, you get to EDGE advanced, and then you add on through renewables or carbon offsets to get to net zero. So it's still 100%, it's not 20%. So the target there is still high. However, you have that opportunity to grow into it.
So with respect to targets, I'm also talking about, I mean, your target is to see 20% of new builds be certified.
Okay.
Yes. And what we want to see is 80%, 90%, 100%. I mean, I'm really not going to get 100%. We can have that as an ambition, but that's not.
Well, is net zero actually real?
No, it's not. But or maybe I shouldn't say that.
I wanted to just.
It's a lofty goal, which we need to strive for in order to move anywhere.
I just wanted to add, you mentioned Colombia. So and how you can graduate, our first project in Panama was just EDGE baseline. And we understood how to get to the next level. And our second project was EDGE advanced. We will try for zero, I promise. But it's true about that region, because you mentioned Colombia. We have found that in that region, there is a significant uptake. And I'm curious, Dennis, on why that region has had such a large adoption. And I think from our experience, from my take on it, I think the competition amongst the developers is very high. There are a lot of developers in affordable housing that are creating very similar products, and their projects are large, and they're next to each other, and there's incentives, and they're trying to find ways to differentiate. You know, what we had to do in our first project, we actually, I'm not sure if you remember, on every one of our homes, under the house number, we actually worked with IFC EDGE and put an engraved EDGE logo on their house number, and every family member had a welcome pack about the features in their home. And the reason we did that was just to give the Venezuelan developers next to us just a little bit of a competition. And what ended up happening was, what do you do when you get a home? You invite your friends and family over. And it became the coffee table, it became the coffee table educational booklet that they were proud of.
Well, there's some ideas for you there, Sheila.
Yeah, anyway, so there's some interesting takes, but that's kind of what our sense in that region has been, is that competition is creating.
It's very true. Colombia, one of the main other reason was financing. So in 2018, when we introduced EDGE in Colombia, we were working very closely with one of their biggest banks, Bank Colombia. We helped them to issue a green bond. And in fact, that was the beginning. When the green bond was issued, the proceeds went to green projects. At the time, they did not have green projects. So that's the other thing. I mean, in most of the discussions we have with financial institutions, they tell you we want to see the pipeline before we can even start it. But these guys didn't see there was no pipeline at the time. At the time, there was just one certified project in Colombia. There wasn't any pipeline, but then they still went ahead on the basis that we would work with them to create the pipeline. So once the bond was done, there was a lot of education, working with developers, and the pipeline came up.
So Dennis, I'm going to stop you there, and just I want to ask you this question because it ties in with what I want to ask Nisa as well. Is in going through this process, how much greenwashing do you come across? You know, how much, do you come across companies or organizations wanting to be certified, wanting to kind of presenting data that is questionable, and how do you deal with that?
A lot. I mean, there's a lot of greenwashing out there, and the EDGE education tries very hard to make sure there isn't any greenwashing for the projects that get certified. And this is through the process that we undertake. First of all, you would do the assessment on the software. You would have to provide documentation to indicate whatever measure that you are choosing to go green. So if you are doing reduced window to wall ratio, you're having efficient lighting, if there is natural ventilation, we would need to see what the design is, what exactly is there. So there should be some proof. And once this is audited, you send this to the auditor would audit it, and then it goes to another reviewer, right? So that reviewer now reviews or audits what the auditor has done. Before, if he is also okay, then the certificate is given. Okay. So it goes through all of this process to ensure that if we provide a final certificate, we are very sure that what we are saying is right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Lisa, in your line of work, people can greenwash as much as they want, but at the end of the day, if you're not receiving the benefits, what's the point really? And I suppose what you're seeing is you're really at the coalface of it in utility management, kind of seeing, is there benefit to this? And are landlords and tenants benefiting from all of these initiatives? And is there an appreciation that there are benefits to be had here in this space? Maybe you can chat to us about that a bit.
Yeah, thanks, Anne-Maree. Absolutely. I think we did some research recently of 200 of our clients, and I think the top drivers that came out of this ESG sort of state of play research was number one, ethics and values and purpose. So I think while yes, you do still see a lot of greenwashing, I think there's a definite awakening and a changing and a much more purposeful alignment and understanding of the broader ESG, and that we're not just talking about plopping a solar PV panel on your roof. This is a much deeper thing. This is about diversity, about inclusion, about so many other things, well-being, communities, and that kind of thing. So I think I've definitely seen that in the work that we do. The other themes that came up, obviously regulatory compliance is a big one, but the other thing that I'm sort of looking at with great interest is what brands and customers are demanding. And we've seen some interesting research, for example, coming out of the retail sector, where Gen Zs are kind of making it very clear that they are not willing to engage with a brand that doesn't align with their values. And their values are exactly that, about fair and just, diversity, inclusion, natural, organic, protecting of the planet. And whether you like Greta Thunberg or not, she's played her part, and maybe not necessarily the most useful one, but I think it's informed our young people, and they will obviously take business forward into the future. And so I think it inspires me, and I feel that the language is now no longer just about cost management. In fact, it's almost like sustainability is the new cost saving.
Yes. So it becomes more about kind of sustainable business practice. Will you have a business that people want to actually interact with in the future? And maybe just my next question here is, PropTech has been a lot about the utility side of things. How do you see it then playing into that side of things? Because that's more, third party, in my mind, it's almost, if you think about carbon emissions, it feels like scope 3. And how do we get PropTech to interface with those types of issues where the landlord doesn't necessarily have all the details of the tenant, but the end user wants to know those details because that's who they're going to interface with?
Yeah, I think, again, going back to that same research, one of the biggest challenges in terms of driving ESG moving forward was data. And then also the complexity of the decision-making process, and that's almost what you're referring to. You kind of feel like if you fix one thing, you might break something else, and you've got to balance these things very, very carefully. And I think the answer for me is that there is already so much tech out there. There are so many data acquisition platforms collecting all types of different data, and so it's not necessarily a shiny, clever new gadget that we need. What we need is integration. So there's an integration piece that can be so, so clever. So if you think about the kind of data that on a spatial layer a municipality might have in terms of understanding a precinct or a community, and if you can integrate that with air quality and with water quality that a different government department is collecting, and integrate that with maybe population data, you can start really creating a much bigger picture. And so I think the next step for me is to see that all of these different pieces of technology become open source and very integratable. And when it comes to integration, then you've got to start again with the engagement. So you've got to start with the why, and then work back from there. What are we trying to achieve? Kind of have a blank canvas, and then work back from there. So I think it's a big piece of engagement. It's a really virtuous journey, and I think that what we'll see in the future, hopefully, is that integration will start seeing a layer that is precinct level and not just building level. It's not just my building in downtown Sandton, but the whole Sandton community can do so much more together when we start pulling all of these pieces of data together.
So you've kind of answered that question that I laid out at the beginning of the, the conversation. And what I'm hearing from you, and I'll ask those on the panel, others on the panel if they want to respond as well, is that actually the next piece of exciting PropTech or PropTech that we need is not a new app or a new piece of technology. It's actually how do we bring all of these pieces together and get them to work harmoniously. And the other piece, which I think we as humans, we tend to forget, is that man is gregarious, right? And we always need to be talking to each other. So no matter what we do, a part of the solution will always be stakeholder engagement. And that's what I'm hearing over and over again and again today.
Yeah. I mean, if I might just add to that, you can look at global international best practice in terms of which standards you may be following, et cetera, et cetera. But all the models around the world are saying that if you want to be global leaders, you actually have to share your information. You have to educate regulators, universities, your competitors. So it's about if true global best practice is about sharing your information. There are quite a few software companies, I think Acorn is one of them, who's advocating for open source municipal data collection and all of that larger macro level data that is available. I mean, the projects that we are doing, I mean, we're working at the moment in Ghana, in Togo, in Benin, in Cameroon, and trying to get information from municipalities in those areas for simple waste-to-energy projects or hydroelectric power stations or waste-to-energy, whatever, is extremely difficult, and we have to rely on international sources that are not that good. So, love what you're saying.
And also maybe just PropTech in government, PropTech in municipalities might go a long way too. I'm going to open it up to the rest of the panel. Are there any other ideas of Sheila? You've got something, but you want it burning.
Burning, but I think just to respond what Lisa had said earlier, I really think the next step for us, for it to actually be fruitful, not just to adoption of PropTech, for it to be fruitful is proper user education, awareness, and working with regulatory bodies. Because unless it's required in terms of regulatory compliance and policy and law, then really the adoption is very self-led, And as long as people associate a cost with certain compliances which are not required by policy, then we'll see a very slow adoption in that, And I think for me, the first step really is that stakeholder engagement and awareness, And I think maybe my challenge to Dennis would be that people need to understand that green building really doesn't have to be expensive, but explained to developers from a very practical perspective and from local context examples. And I think once people appreciate that really there's not a big cost associated with this, then we'll be able to move on to the next level. But I think also for us, especially looking at our local context, is to encourage reporting. Because as Lisa was saying, it's very hard, to get information from municipalities, from governments. But once we adopt reporting in a standardized way, then it's easy to move next level of collecting specific data and then move on to regulatory compliance and then actually do away with greenwashing and have everyone get on board from a self-regulated perspective. So I think it's critical for us to engage government bodies and just talk about standard reporting ways. Then the adoption will come after that.
Thank you. Dennis and Brian, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, but if you don't, I'm going to open it up to the floor to see if there are any questions. And if there aren't any questions, I'll leave it open to some closing remarks. Dun, dun, dun. Okay. Are there any closing remarks from, for me, it's been quite an interesting panel discussion. I'm getting very excited here.
We'd like to hear from you.
Okay, sure. I thought it was quite interesting you mentioning actually the regulation that we're seeing in Europe. So I work for an investment company and we invest in listed property and what it is that we are looking for and what it is that our clients are looking for. And you're absolutely right. In Europe, the regulation with respect to how you categorize your funds is becoming more and more stringent. And so I need more and more data from the companies in which I invest in order to make those decisions and understand whether I can invest in them and to understand how they fit into the greater context from a regulatory perspective. But it's not just regulatory, right? It's, license to operate. What are these companies going to look like in 5, 10, 15 years' time? Today you might save 5 Rand here and 10 Rand here, and that's great. But actually, are these CEOs and boards of companies thinking strategically and understanding that we live in an environment where you need to adopt practices that are sustainable so that you can still be in existence in 5, 10 years' time, not only from a resource perspective, but from a what are your customers and clients demanding from you. And the divergence between boards and management teams is stark and growing every day. I had a meeting with a CEO of a listed company you all know 2 or 3 days ago, and he complained that this board only wants to talk about ESG. And I wanted to say, well, you're whining to the wrong person here. I started my career off as an ESG analyst. If you don't understand how critical this is to the longevity of your business, then strategically you don't know in my opinion, you may not know what's going on. And the opposite of that, I had a conversation on Friday with another CEO of a listed property company, and he fully said, Ann-Maree, yes, we need to convert our data and what we understand into real live things that can make a difference for us. So how do we convert this into a green lease with our tenant? Our listed retailers, or those retailers who are listed, also have net zero targets. So how do we work with them so we can all work together towards these net zero targets? Because for property companies, it's their scope 3 that's actually their biggest issue. So that's a very interesting angle. And I think it takes everybody to come to the party, again to your point of engagement and education. And someone was at the panel just before this on funding for PropTech, made astute observations about people in certain age brackets. And that actually what needs to happen is education across age brackets into what each segment of the market needs and wants and understands. Particularly with respect to ESG, because there just is this disconnect in that regard. So it's daunting, but it's so exciting. It's so exciting. It's so exciting because you're building a better tomorrow. You're building a business that can, or hopefully building a business that can serve the needs of the population in which it exists. And then also hopefully be a really good investment at the end of the day. Because in my case, I need to give good returns to the pension funds who are invested in our funds. And so you want a combination of those things. You want to give them good monetary returns, and you want to give them an environment in which those beneficiaries actually want to retire and live. So it's what we started to call kind of double materiality. And that's a very important thing. Thank you for asking. Great. So if there are no other closing remarks, thank you so much to the panel for your insights. It's been a very interesting conversation. I kind of wish we had time to talk before this, because now I just want to have dinner with all of you and pick your brains and hear more about what you have to say. And I hope you all found that interesting too. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks.